I'm back once again to bring you some of my most disliked Sega Saturn games. In part 1, we went over some winners like The Crow, Criticom, and Death Crimson, and I have 10 more games that you can add to your list of must-miss titles. I hope you guys enjoy the worst Saturn games I've ever played, part 2. We are going to start with a game that began its life as a sequel to the 16-bit fighter Rise of the Robots. Rise 2 Resurrection was released in early 1996 by Acclaim and developed by Mirage Technologies. The first game had received a largely negative reception itself, so the sequel was designed to be more like Mortal Kombat, the hit game at the time. The way you input commands for each character mirrors Mortal Kombat closely, and it even has fatality-like execution moves after you defeat your opponent, which actually steals one of their powers in addition to killing them. The visuals are a combination of 2D pre-rendered sprites against two-dimensional backgrounds, sort of an attempt at combining Killer Instinct and Mortal Kombat's presentation. Everything sounds okay on paper, so what went wrong here? Well, pretty much damn near everything, really. First, the visuals are a joke for a 5th generation title, especially a two-dimensional one. Everything is dark and drab, lacking fine detail across both the fighters and the backdrops they battle against. The animation is piss poor across most of the combatants, and there is next to no animation in the backgrounds at all. Where Rise 2 really comes crashing down is its gameplay, however. While it's modeled after Mortal Kombat, it feels nothing of the sort. The combo system is loose and janky, rarely allowing you to connect any meaningful damage before your enemy is on the ground. The special moves are utterly and completely imbalanced fighter to fighter. Some are so overpowered they can just spam the hell out of a single move and you'll struggle to defend yourself. Have one of the characters where their special moves involve multiple motions to pull off and you'll be looking at a continue screen only a few fighters in. The overall presentation is just more dirt in your eyes. The characters lack personality or any real defining traits beyond their size, and there is next to no story here to endear you to their calls. What you are left with is a poor playing, poor looking, and poor sounding game that stands on a system loaded with fighting software infinitely more appealing. Rise 2 isn't just a waste of time, it's an abomination that the developers should be ashamed of. It was released in North America, Europe, and Japan. Blackfyre is a helicopter flight and battle simulator where you must take on an enemy that is using stolen alien technology to terrorize the world. I want you to take in exactly what you're seeing here for a moment. Nearly half the screen is taken up by the 2D dashboard of the helicopter you are flying, leaving just a small area for the Saturn to really paint some nice graphics for us, right? Well, just look at that mess of baby shit green textures and in-your-face drawing. There's no detail in these environments at all outside of a few color variations on the ground. You'll fly around looking for buildings and bases to blow up, but you'll find little to resemble such. The best you have here are enemy planes and tanks attacking you by the dozens, and gameplay that amounts to little more than spraying the playfield with your weapons hoping to hit something since there are no crosshairs to help guide you. The gameplay itself is fairly responsive, but relies on a damage model that if you are unlucky enough to take a hit in the tail rotor, you can no longer control your aircraft reliably. Instead of just ending the game then and there, it allows you to go on in this state, unable to defend yourself properly and basically just taking it up the ass while the AI punishes the hell out of you. This can be infuriating in the longer stages that show up later, after putting in 15 minutes of battle, only to be crippled this way and unable to continue despite your craft being in the green everywhere else. Many times I have seen people defend this game as not that bad, but this was Sega, and in the grand scheme of their properties and IPs, a game of this caliber was out of place and not worthy of their name. This was a cash-in title of little substance and simple gameplay, and Saturn owners deserved better from the company that brought us the likes of Wing War and Desert Tank. Not to mention, this is the kind of shit people were looking at next to the games on the PlayStation, like Warhawk, which just ripped this puke-inducing pile of rubbish apart. This was such a pitiful excuse of software that Sega didn't even have the willpower to impose it on the rest of the world themselves, instead letting Virgin Interactive release it in Europe and Japan. Video games based on movies and TV shows have a long and storied history. Sometimes the property is nailed and the content unbelievable, like Capcom's and Sega's Disney games. And then you have crap like Dragonheart, Fire and Steel here, brought to us by Acclaim and developed by Funcom, released in December of 1996. Digitized sprites and backgrounds make up the entire visual presentation and look just awful. Everything is stiffly animated and you fight the same 3 sprites throughout the majority of the early levels. Even later levels repeat much of the same assets over and over, but you do at least get a new background to play against. Bonus rounds are full motion video based QuickTime events, the game's lone break from the stiff and boring gameplay. This gameplay is little more than walking left to right and hacking away at ludicrously stupid AI that will sometimes fight back, but often just stand there and take it. You get some traps here and there to piss you off, but most of the game amounts to little more than what I've described. This was the kind of game that committed the biggest sin in the 5th generation of video game systems, in my view. It lacked any type of new gameplay element over the 16-bit software that came before it. And then it lacked any wow factor in its audio and visuals to make up for it. It was simply a terrible playing game that looked like complete garbage. Nothing here is aged well, and it wasn't good when it was fresh, making this a worthless experience all the way around. So poor was this stinker, Acclaim didn't even release it in Japan. Every so often a game will come along and its technical makeup will cripple it on such a powerful level that it ruins the entire game. This was definitely the case with the Saturn version of Doom, developed by Rage Software and published by GT Interactive, and released in March of 1997. This is based on the PlayStation port of Ultimate Doom and Doom 2, the PC games often credited for the explosion of the first-person shooter genre. The Saturn port is debilitated by a frame rate that ruins the gameplay. Being a first-person shooter, you aim by essentially moving the screen to the area you want the weapon to shoot, making the performance a big deal with these kinds of games. Right from the beginning, things are unbelievably choppy. No enemies, no items, simple architecture, and it's struggling to run at 10 frames per second. You know you are in for a bad time when you see a situation like this, and it only gets worse in the larger areas with more stuff on the screen. Sometimes things degenerate so far it's a point-blank slideshow of ugliness, becoming unplayable enough to make even the most die-hard fans of this content want to give up. To make matters worse, the US version shipped with no multiplayer of any kind, despite the back of the box claiming it had deathmatch and link cable capability. The options did make it into the PAL and Japanese versions, thankfully. The lead programmer of the Saturn port wanted to use the hardware's VDP1 and VDP2 graphics capabilities to make a game much more specialized and better performing. Mr. John Carmack himself vetoed this idea, claiming it impacted the texture quality too much. I am no rocket scientist, but I trade some uglier textures for performance any day. After you play this mess, I'm sure you'd agree. I'd also like to take a moment and dispel the myth that the Japanese version of this game, which was published by SoftBank, has been tightened up and features a much improved experience. I own the Japanese version of it, and it still runs really bad, dropping to a slideshow in busier areas the same as the US and PAL editions. It may have been optimized slightly here and there, but overall it mirrors the problems with performance the other regions have. This engine was simply not how the Saturn needed to render this content, and the end result is a stark reminder of the troubles developers faced getting games to take full advantage of all the Saturn was capable of. Every so often a game comes along that has the charm of the better B movies, yet we have no problem recognizing that it is poorly designed. Battle Monsters definitely fits that category. Released in June of 1995, developed by Scarab, the team that brought us the awesome Saturn wrestling game, All Japan Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua. Unlike that game, Battle Monsters is a digitized 2D fighting game akin to something like Mortal Kombat. Here, most of the combatants are based on a classic creature, be it Frankenstein's monster, a wraith, Medusa, and even a dude that carries around his disembodied head. The action scales in and out with the gameplay like a Neo Geo fighter, and everything you see is either a digitized background or sprite. The super simple gameplay consists of one punch, one kick, a couple of jump buttons, and a special appeal button that acts as a taunt and an additional attack for certain special moves. Battle Monsters is an ugly game to be sure. The low-res, low-budget digitized assets give Street Fighter the movie a run for its money, and none of it is animated well, with specials having little more than a few frames apiece. The gameplay isn't nearly as stiff and lifeless as something like Rise 2 Resurrection, but it still lacks the polish and feel of even the more average fighters from Capcom and SNK. And that really is Battle Monsters' main problem. It exists on a platform with numerous better games where even the weaker efforts are still much more playable. Acclaim would bring this west to North American and PAL territories, and while there can be some guilty fun to be had bashing monsters in this one, there is no question it's on the lowest tier of Sega Saturn fighting games. Watch my channel long enough and you'll recognize that I'm not a fan of full motion video shooters in general. There usually has to be something special about it for me to enjoy. Unfortunately, the awful Chaos Control is lacking in every conceivable way. Originally released in December of 1995 by Infogram. Its terribly plain environments lack detail and the video quality does nothing to help that. Much worse are the enemy ships you shoot, which don't disappear like in other games, instead they just become obscured by a cloud of smoke. This often blocks you from seeing other enemies behind them, causing missed shots near constantly. Once past the first area, you get some variety in your stages, but the poor video quality destroys this at every turn. Blocky and blurry compression artifacts destroy the illusion of realism every single time. The weird thing is that its story is driven by some highly stylized cinemas loaded with color that are really unique. This is how the game should have looked in all of its sequences, frankly. Nothing else about its presentation stands out or is unique otherwise, and the gameplay lacks any excitement or depth beyond blasting things that keep flying around after the fact. There's no sense of satisfaction here at all, and there are much better options on even the Sega CD. It does support the Saturn shuttle mouse and plays a lot better with it. A remixed version was released in the PAL territories nearly a year after the Japanese launch, with improvements to the visuals, loading times, and adds light gun support. This remixed version made its way to Japan shortly thereafter. Congo the movie was another stinker that Sega of America commissioned Jumping Jack Software to help make for them, which was released in March of 1996. This first-person shooter is guilty of every sin the genre is capable of punishing its players with. Environments where everything looks the same, enemies that are poorly animated and more comical than threatening, and gameplay where you can actually run out of ammo simply doing battle and killing enemies that it puts in front of you. The gameplay is atrocious in every sense of the word. Enemies pop out of the forest walls all around you at every turn. That area you just walked through that was clear, now it has 6 mosquitoes tearing your ass up. Looking at the map is mandatory just to navigate the hellishly ugly environments because every nook and cranny looks exactly the same. Not just on stage 1, but on stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4, and so on. You have to play for quite some time before you get some truly new graphics to see. It's also guilty of making you play for extended periods of time using the same weapons constantly. You need to be a good hour into this cesspool of software before you actually find anything remotely fun to use. It also lacks any additional modes to break up the pain the single player experience puts on you. There's no multiplayer, no minigames, or anything else for that matter to help out. It's pretty easy to blame all of the Saturn's woes on Sega of Japan with all of the one-sided media out there. But Sega of America could have put together the most powerful hardware that generation that was easy to program for, and it still would have failed because this is the kind of software it thought people were willing to spend their hard-earned cash on. Software makes or breaks hardware, and Sega of America helped cripple the Saturn's public image with garbage like this, well after its release. So pathetic was this heap, Sega never released it in Japan or Europe, nor would any third-party publisher dare add its stain to their names. November of 1996 brought Saturn owners the dreadful Fist by Imagineer. It's a 3D fighter done in the mold of Sega's Virtua Fighter games, but I dishonor the latter by even mentioning it in the same breath. This is pretty much the 3D polygon equivalent of Rise 2. Bland characters, stiff gameplay, and zero excitement. The visuals are truly terrible, consisting of bad textures, poor art design, and backgrounds that sorta hang out without anything actually happening in them. The gameplay is where this really falls to pieces though, and I can't stress enough just how bad it is. There's no real combo system to speak of, moves are stiff and don't link together well, and every other move knocks you down, meaning you'll spend a lot of time on your back trying desperately to get back up. Most of the time the music in these bad games isn't even worth mentioning. Because it's behind such poor design, it's like saying to someone their hand looks good on the arm they just had cut off. But I have to mention it here. The music is actually pretty good, feeling kind of like the stuff you'd hear in a Sega game. That's a shame too, because everything else in this turd is pretty much game breaking when it comes to fun factor. Much like the other fighting games in this episode, Fist here suffers even more because of just how much better some of the other fighting games are on the Saturn. Play Virtua Fighter 2 or Dead or Alive for a few minutes, then pop in Fist to get a rude awakening of just how bad it looks and plays in comparison. Only the poor Saturn owners in Japan were abused by this atrocity.
Ready? Go!
Man Oh Man Time Commando, ported by Virtual Studio and published by Acclaim in March of 1998. This Saturn adventure game is the digitized equivalent of an ass-whooping for your senses. First your eyes get pounded with terrible polygon models over top of grainy, jerky, full-motion video backgrounds. As the stage moves area to area, the characters in it jump and jerk into place until it stops, obliterating any sense of engagement in what's going on. The animation is slow and choppy too, and there is a lag to every motion and action. Next, your ears are assaulted with music that doesn't fit with what's going on in the environment, which the developers tried to add some ambient animal noises as a band-aid. That leaves you with a poor-looking, weird-sounding presentation right from the start. And just when you think it can't get any worse, Your sense of touch is set on fire by gameplay that kicks you square in the balls. I mean, holy hell does this game play bad. The easiest way I can say this is to think of Resident Evil, where you need to ready your character to attack with a button, but then you need to use the directional pad to either punch, kick, or attack with your weapons. A block was added to give this system some depth, but it just falls flat in the attempt thanks to the horribly laggy inputs, attacks that can miss enemies right in front of you, and enemies that can gang up on you and wreck you in seconds. This is all made worse by the fact that a death sends you right back to the damn title screen to start the game over every time. This means you will be replaying the first few stages over and over again until you get better, and when something looks and plays like this, that's just something you don't want to do. The original PlayStation version of this wasn't that good to begin with, and it's even worse here. This steaming pile of dog shit was only released in Japan. The final game you should avoid is the full-motion video shooter Creature Shock. First released in January of 1996 by Data East and developed by Argonaut Software of Star Fox fame. As I said a little earlier, I am not a fan of full-motion video shooters, especially ones where the action is broken up by pointless intermissions and long stretches where nothing is actually happening. You'll get a lot of both in Creature Shock here, and man does it make for one boring-ass game. This is set up in a more adventure style, allowing you to explore the area a bit, and it even has multiple pathways. Every so often you get stopped by some enemies that need killing, but even this offers little fun. There are two kinds of enemies here, the easy to kill shoot 'em anywhere kind, and the bigger, meaner guys that only have a weak spot that needs to be exploited. The latter kind tends to be far more irritating than fun, and many of them will protect that spot so often you have to receive mandatory damage while the animations play out. All this makes for a terribly paced experience of nothing going on, combined with battles that often only take a few seconds to play out. The visuals are also quite tame, with nothing really sticking out as truly gruesome or threatening. The biggest sin of Creature Shock is its boredom. No one element is broken to the point of being unplayable, but it's just so uninteresting and so not fun to play, it lacks any appeal after a level or two. Had this been compatible with the stunner light gun and supported 2 players, it likely would have been infinitely more playable. It's difficult to put bad games in a box and simply say this is the definition that defines all these games. These games are bad for often different reasons, and even when the reasons are similar, there are varying degrees to which they commit their sins. An ugly game like Chaos Control can easily give way to an even uglier game like Time Commando, yet both still fall under the same umbrella. This is the case with gameplay as well. As bad as some of these games are to me, there are a few that are even worse, making it hard to lump them all into the same basket. There is also the case of playability, where some of you will likely have found some fun in these games, and may even consider them not deserving of their inclusion here. But there is a difference between finding joy in something and recognizing that they are poorly designed compared to other games in their genre, or on the same platform. I can acquiesce to the notion that these games can provide fun given your personal preferences, but that doesn't mean they still aren't games that rank low on the totem pole of strong game design. My daughter loves Battle Monsters because of its simple gameplay, for instance, but nobody in their right mind is going to say it's a good game when genre giants like Street Fighter 03 and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter reside on the same platform. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.